All right, so the cheek area is largely controlled by the cheekbones. Now, unlike the brow that had front and side planes, the cheek area comprises the front plane of the head in this kind of mid-third region of the head from about, the bottom side of the brow to where the mouth roughly is. The cheekbones represent the front side of the head. You can see this graphic shadow again on the side, separating the cheek area from the jaw. This is the jaw we'll cover later. The cheek area, that's the front. And they make this beautiful little angle that comes down from behind the brow, out and down, cutting in the head at a sharp angle. If we rotate the Asaro head this way, we can see the more complex side. There are some planes in here that even add to that rhythm further. Sometimes you get a sharp cut like we saw on this side. Other times there's a graceful little question mark-like curve to it, which I'll point out in a moment. The cheekbone also share a little line with the zygomatic, which we know all about now. We were looking at the zygomatic around here, straight back from the brow in the last chapter, but now we're going to trace the zygomatic down at a slight angle this way. And this will kind of signal the beginning of our cheekbone region. So there's a whole lot of connection happening with the brow. It continues rhythmically, it continues anatomically, and let's get right into it. All right, let's begin our exploration of the cheek area with these two Andrew Loomis drawings. Now, they're drawn by Loomis, so naturally they're structurally sound. And what I love about them is he hasn't drawn the planes. Well, he has drawn them, but he hasn't put lines around them. Let's start with what we already know. This is the brow region. Now, the cheek area snaps in like a puzzle piece directly below it. It's this area right in here. Now, much like we did with the brow, the most important thing we need to do with the cheek area is to understand that boxiness of the head. In the cheek area, it separates the head from the front plane to the side plane. If we look at our Asaro head up here, specifically let's look at this half of it, the simplified half. These planes right in here are what we're looking at. And the thing I love the most about the cheek area is it separates the head from the front, which is this area, to the side. Now, this is not the cheek area, this is the jaw area. We're not covering this area in this section. We'll do that in the next section. So what we need to understand right now, right away, the most important thing is that the cheek region is the front part of the face. And like most parts of the human head, nature has done a very artistic design. The shape is just so nice. And I'll show you what that shape is right now. Okay, first thing, remember this line we drew in the brow, this line that goes directly to the ear? We're going to start from this end point here and draw another line roughly to about there. Now these lines connect, and be careful here, don't connect them there, connect them there. That sounds like such a minute thing, and maybe it is, but this is a plane that faces, it faces this way. We'll talk about which way the planes face in a second, but this is separate. Now, the rest of the cheekbone kind of cuts into the face a little bit like this, maybe a slight curvature to it. Again, everyone's slightly different here with these planes. And then what we'll do is we'll just taper it off down here. It's kind of trending down this way. And then we'll just let it fade away for now. We're not dealing with this section yet. Let's compare this to our friend the skull, and let's see how these planes relate to what we've got here. Let me just move this over a little bit. All right, so this first plane we drew over here relates to the thickness of the zygomatic bone. And this part here is also controlled by the zygomatic bone, still subcutaneous in this area right over here. Now look for the angle here. Look for this angle. It's not a 90-degree angle. It's whatever angle that is. It's greater than 90 degrees. So we're going to look for something similar on our model over here. It doesn't have to be exact. Every plane of the head diagram you find will have slightly different angles. And everyone is different in real life too. But just the idea is that it's not a 90-degree angle. Now, when you get down to this part of the face, the bone is no longer subcutaneous. It's buried under flesh, under muscle, under fat. And we'll talk about this region coming up later in this lesson. Right now, the main thing to understand is we got these, and then let's just kind of taper it down like this. Okay, going back to our Loomis drawings, the thing I love so much about the cheekbones is, like I said a moment ago, they separate the front of the box, like the head is like a box, right? They separate the front of the box from the side of the box. Everything here, in fact, let me draw it on the Asaro head. Everything here is same cheek, right? Everything there, it points upward. There is a direction that these planes generally face. Even this plane, the zygomatic plane here, now the zygomatic is on the side of the head, but it still points up. The brow also points out or up, but in a slightly different angle. They kind of generally trend in the same direction, just not exactly. Again, the head is like a box, but it's not a perfect box. The study of planes really is the study of changes in direction, which is particularly useful if your goal is to paint the head, which we'll do later in this lesson. And just to be clear about it, the last thing I'll do, I'll just throw in a quick little value here just to separate those front planes from the side. Just clean that up a little bit. There we go. The dimension of this head is really starting to come along now. Let's do the same block in on our model over here. Again, let's put in what we know. This is the brow stuff. In fact, let me just use a different color. This was all the stuff from the last section on the brow. There we go. We draw another line coming from here representing the zygomatic bone, and we essentially have this kind of thing going on. And the gesture of this head, she's looking down, so the head is tilted down. But again, these cheekbone planes are so oriented upwards. The brow kind of does this, cheekbone does that. They always point up or out. Again, I'm saying up because that's the general trajectory, but they point outwards like this. They're the front plane of the box. Again, if the head is represented by a box, the front of the brow and the cheekbones would be like this part of the box. So Hollywood, which largely trades on our current notion of what beauty is, in fact, the entire beauty industry, seems to really value clear plane separation in the cheekbone and cheek area. I'm not sure exactly why, but perhaps it's something to do with the natural rhythm and flow of these planes that we find appealing. Here's a photo of a young Angelina Jolie. I think that's who this is anyway. On her, we can clearly see this rhythm of the cheekbones happening. And of course, it's symmetrical, so it goes down both sides. Now, this is the first time we're seeing a front view, and this is interesting. I want to point something out. Remember on this head, I pointed out that there's a gap right here. We can find that present on the actual human model. The cheekbones slide behind the eye. They don't start here, they start here. So this gap is quite important. It's a common mistake that I see for people to kind of break the plane here, and the cheekbones kind of tuck in too far this way, and it just, it creates all kinds of asymmetry and weird design. That's the thing about the face. When you understand the flow and the rhythms and the planes of the face, you'll be hyper aware that even the slightest misalignment in your planes will cause your design to flatten out or just look terrible. And the thing will just start looking amateurish immediately. And again, this whole lesson that we're doing is me showing you the most important parts that you absolutely need to know about the head in order for that to not happen to you. Speaking of rhythms of the planes, there's another little rhythm I enjoy, and it's how the cheekbones link up with the brow. Remember when we were talking about the brow, we talked about this break of the eyebrow in this plane here. Well, this break of the eyebrow comes down, meets the cheekbone, and kind of forms a question mark. It's sort of this question mark-like shape. And then, of course, here it's a backwards question mark. I always look for that when I'm designing my own heads. Just a nice little shape that we're all aware of, we can kind of test our planes against. Of course, it's not a perfect question mark, it's question mark-like. Now let's look at the zygomatic bone. Again, that was the plane from the brow that went back to the start of the ear, and the plane from the cheekbone that also goes back to roughly that same point, the zygomatic bone here. You notice that, let me undo my brush stroke so you can see the face. It's not as obvious as this plane of the cheekbone. It's much more clear that there's a clean break in this part of the head. This part of the head is more of a subtle change. That side plane of the brow comes down. You can see it ever so slightly comes up, right? And then ever so slightly comes down. It's a plane change, it's important, and it will have different degrees of clarity on different models. But even where it's subdued, there is a little bit of a change there. Again, the bone is subcutaneous. You can feel it on your own head right now. This is another great piece of reference. She seems to have slightly wider cheekbones than Angelina did, but you can see they go up behind the eye, right? It's this flow here, and it comes down and then tapers off this way. And again, we'll cover the lower part later. I love this area. The brow comes down like this, which we talked about. The cheekbone comes out from behind it. So it's not a continuous contour like that. The brow is in front, the cheekbone is behind when you're dealing with perspective like this. The cheekbone cuts in. This part is the jaw, the side plane of the box. We're not dealing with that yet. This and this are different planes. Those aren't the cheeks. It's common for someone to mistake the cheekbone as being too broad, and they'll bring it down like this. But no, the cheekbone does not form the contour down there, at least not from this perspective. We can still clearly see the front plane of the cheek versus the jaw plane, which covers the side. And once again, look at this nice little question mark shape that it makes. Just beautiful rhythms that nature has given us. The head is interesting. Nature doesn't always give you good rhythms. Like I also talk about landscape painting and stuff in my other classes. Nature often does not give you pleasing rhythms out in the landscape. It's very randomized. But on the human head, nature has done a very artistic job. You know, speaking of the beauty industry, there's a whole makeup style called contouring, where people put a darker tone of whatever makeup they use. I don't know the terminology, but they use a darker tone underneath their cheekbones to emphasize the plane change. This is just further evidence of the undeniable link that we've crafted between beauty and noticeable cheekbones. Even on a heavier set individual in a non-ideal lighting scenario, we can still see this plane. Now remember, this is the subcutaneous area where the bone hits the surface, which is why even on a thicker model like this, you can still see the evidence of that cheekbone plane. Down here, it gets lost underneath flesh. And we're going to talk about some of these areas later on. But it's this rhythm here that is visible almost every single time. And of course, don't forget its symmetrical counterpart over there. And then I like to just kind of taper it off this way, and we'll deal with the muzzle and stuff like that later on. Hello, cheekbones. On a very lean face, that is a face with incredibly low body fat percentage, the zygomatic appears so dramatically that it creates a concavity underneath it. And just for the sake of science, let's do a little fun experiment. Poke your own face right there. You should feel that cheekbone. Well, if you're human, you'll feel that cheekbone. Now poke your face right around here. This is where the cavity of your mouth is. Like well, you can't see me doing it, but I can push my finger into my own face. There's no bones there. So when the face has very little like fat content, in other words, it doesn't have much flesh to, pad this, you can really see that the skull is determining the shape of the form. Compare this with our Asaro head over here. Look at the plane here, straight down, and then it kind of, this would be the jaw plane, this would be the cheekbone plane. You can see that exact rhythm on him. This cheekbone, basically comprising the front of the head that faces upward, and then, I keep saying this, but we'll talk about the jaw later. All right, so drawing the cheekbones in isolation, like we did with the brow, can be a little strange looking. So let's start with one of our brow drawings from the last section. So we know the ear is roughly around here. Let's bring in that zygomatic bone. And again, we get that thickness here as it goes behind the eye plane. We'll come down with it and around. Again, I'm trying to get that question mark sort of rhythm. And I could have drawn this with a curve, but sometimes a curve is more accurately drawn by breaking it up into two straights. I'll just taper that off down here. And this is in perspective, so let me just draw a quick perspective line. Remember that this plane faces up. So our line on a 3/4 view is this sort of thing. Comes out and then down. It's a different kind of contour than this. Again, perspective will adjust things and all kinds of, the foreshortening does all kinds of funny things. Your artistic homework is to learn how these rhythms look in different perspectives. I'll cover some of them here, but there's endless varieties of, ways you can see the head. The center line will help. Just get this area here and then down. I haven't mentioned this, but just like the brow, where I didn't draw the eyes, here I'm not drawing the nose. The nose will be built on top of the cheekbone plane. That'll be in a later section of this lesson. The individual features are less important than the overall structure of the head. The structure is just that. It's the foundational strength upon which the features and any little details are built. From this perspective, there's probably not going to be a lot of the jaw showing, but there would be here, this side plane, I'll just quickly indicate, there would be the side plane very noticeable here. So as far as the cheekbones go, separating that front from the side is exactly what we want to do. And checking your work with this question mark rhythm can be really useful. Let's try a much more simplified drawing here, just to show you, you don't have to spend forever on these. Let's just get a quick boxy plane. This will be the brow region. It's going to do something like this. It cuts in for the underneath part of the brow where the eye socket is. We find the ear is somewhere over here, side plane of the head. So that's the brow. And then, the cheekbone would just come in, would come out from behind the head. Let's get our overall, make sure we're in perspective here. In fact, a center line always helps. Down the brow, down the center, out for the cheekbones, and then tapering down. It always helps to acknowledge perspective, so I'll use my orange pen to just quickly grab some perspective lines here. And that cheekbone comes out, in, and if we want, we can just quickly indicate that this is a side plane. Let's try one in profile. And again, sometimes it helps just to bring up a photo, but then do a little study off to the side. So let's start with the brow. Again, one chapter of this lesson building upon the next. Connect that. Go down for the eye socket area. That bit of thickness. Throw this into a bit of shadow. Just indicate that plane change. Back to the zygomatic bone. This plane of the head will just have it wrap around. Cut off the brow where that hairline is, somewhere in here. That hair has some thickness. Okay, cheekbones. We'll start in where that ear roughly is. Come out for the zygomatic bone, the thickness here. A little bit too far there. Remember, I need that space, right? Let's come down here, out. It's pretty straight on him. It's kind of like this overall, remember that angle I showed you earlier? This overall angle. And then down. And then we're not drawing the nose right now, so let's just have the head just kind of go down like this. And it always helps to take the major directional plane changes and throw them into shadow. We know the zygomatic point's up, so we leave that alone, and we get that in shadow. Let's try that extreme top view from earlier. We'll find the ear. Of course, from the top, the ear, we're just seeing the top plane of the ear, the same ear over on this side. Now, going back, remember that in this extreme view, we're going to see a lot of this top plane here. So this is all going to be one plane. In fact, let me just grab a landmarking sort of tool here just to quickly get this plane. And then I can go find my pathway to it. We're not going to get much curvature from the top. Because again, perspective will flatten that out. Now let's make sure our dimensions are sound, like our symmetry. And then in this area where the head starts tapering down, we'll just let it sort of taper a bit. And we'll deal with this area later. Depending on the angle, you might see a little bit of that break from the front plane of the cheek here to the side plane of the jaw there, revealing that boxiness of the head that is ever pervasive. Next one, I'll just load up a brow drawing from the front. We're not going to see much of that zygomatic bone, but it does come out from behind, as we know. Same on this side here. Now, I think what I'll do is I'll draw two different treatments. You can see on the Asaro head, we have one plane that kind of cuts sharply like this, and the other one kind of has that question mark thing. I'll try both here. Even when the plane does cut straight, there can be a bit of an arc to it, just like that. And then the question mark one comes down in a little more sharply, and then down. Again, different people have different arrangements of the same planes, and both are valid. Of course, this face looks weird because you can't have two different ones on each side, but I'm just showing you kind of the same way the Asaro head does, where it's got two different arrangements on different halves. And finally, let's take a look at a head pointing up to complete our selection here. We got the zygomatic bone coming out, serving up a nice front-facing plane here, which will taper off down there. Might be brought in a little too far. It's a bad habit of mine. I bring cheekbones in too far. I always got to check myself there. Everyone will have their own bad habits. A common one is not checking perspective. So make sure you get that in. These are like half perspective lines, half cross contour lines going around that form. The plane on the other side will come out and come in. Again, it's always helpful to, my center line was a bit off, always helpful to find or refine that center line. There we go, and I could always just throw this into a quick tone if I wanted to. And there might be the slightest change of plane on this side visible from this view. I'll rough that in. Just for fun, you can get a lighter value and just throw it on the cheekbone plane, the one that faces the most up, just to emphasize that that plane is separate from this plane. And man, that center line is way off. Just always be checking that. We can map out the zygomatic change and then down. And just as a quick appetite whetter, look how easy it would be to just throw a little nose on there and have it sit nicely on structure. But getting ahead of myself, let's move on to the next bit.